The story of the Masque starts with Brendan Mullen, a half-Scottish, half-Irish lad who was born in Paisley, Scotland in October of 1949, and by the age of 8 was living in Manchester, England. His father loved musical theatre, and Brendan's teenage years in England were spent writing about music for British magazines. He also played drums too, just not only like writing about music, but playing music too. Like,
was he in
like
the Beatles?
Oh yeah, did you not know that? Before Ringo Starr jumped in, it was Brendan Mullen. The problem was that he was doing it after they broke up, and it's kind of hard to be in the Beatles when there are no more Beatles.
That's the best time to get into the Beatles.
Dude, there's 4 spots open. You could be any one of them. In 1975, at the age of 26, Mullen came to Los Angeles on vacation and liked it so much he decided to stay, which is...
Wait, do you have TB or something?
That's what I was thinking. Like, you're not sick with... You don't got the coughers disease? Showing up in 1975 and being like, this is nice. Like, no, it wasn't. We know better now.
Well, have you seen Columbo? Murders every day.
Columbo looks great because Columbo's always like, his wife will keep him up and he's just like smoking like cigars and his hair is just a rat's nest. And
Sounds beautiful.
And he's just always exhausted. But everyone else, all the like, he usually goes after like high class people. But it's like, it's such a weird area where people want to dress nice, like early 70s, late 60s. So it's like blazers and turtlenecks and suits. But the Beatles influence has already kicked everything over. So like they have like bad shaggy hair suits and turtlenecks. It's awful.
We've been watching the Bob Newhart show.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And these are the ugly, like Suzanne Plachette, very pretty with the worst haircut I've ever, like there's so many people in this show that just have god awful, like the only reason Bob Newhart looks good is because he's bald.
Best compliment.
No, I mean this with offense. The best looking person on this show is the bald one. Or the balding one. I'm sure in a few seasons he will be the bald one.
He will be the bald one. We're only allowed to have one on each show. Ed Asner was the one on Mary Tyler Moore. So he stayed here in town. He took up odd jobs to keep himself here while looking for a place where he could rehearse and jam with other musicians. I think one of his jobs was he was shining shoes at Elvira Street. So let's take a moment to talk about the late 70s music scene in Los Angeles.
Okay.
What we call classic rock was all but done. And the singer-songwriter Laurel Canyon thing was kind of fading out. But we said like Joni Mitchell and Carly Simon. I think James Taylor was still kind of around at that time.
Okay, so softer. The music that's on like the wave.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think like the mamas and papas were already like way done by that point too.
Well, they were grandmamas and grandpapas by then with a lot of weird wrinkles in that.
Glam was starting to plateau, even though there was like, I knew it from this book and I kind of forget every once in a while that glam is almost half of the equation that makes punk. Was like these kids wanted to be glam, but they were so dirty and angry that the glam came out weird.
But they didn't have the musical skills of Brian May.
We want to dress like T-Rex, but then that's it. By the mid-70s, bloated rock acts like they weren't bloated at the time. I consider Van Halen to be pretty bloated. But they were starting to make I didn't realize that Eddie Van Halen's from Pasadena, but they were starting to hit the scene at the time.
Maybe isn't David Lee Roth also? Or?
I don't know. I didn't look into it. I was like, where's Van Halen from? And it just said that and then as soon as David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar was in the sentence, like, I'm not going to read any more about this.
Another local hometown hero musician. Imagine a show that could have been Eddie Van Halen and Richie Valens live in concert together.
You have to slow down. You are playing Donna too fast. Funk disco groups like the Commodores and the Village People were topping the charts along with Donna Summer at the time. This is like on the brink of disco, basically. Right. Funk is becoming disco. Hometown bands like War and El Chicano were at their peak at this time. And on the radio, February 1977, the Eagles released Hotel California and it won't stop playing.
And they never stopped
releasing it. Even reading like...
Every 30 minutes since 1977, it's played on the
Hotel
radio.
California. In any state, not just California. In any state, you'll hear Hotel California.
That day, we all became California.
There's a really great oral history where I learned about the punk scene of this era. And even they're like, it wouldn't stop. It was always on the radio.
It single-handedly caused punk.
Fleetwood Mac was at the top of their games. Dreams was released that year. Bee Gees Staying Alive was about to explode the world. Wow. This was the musical landscape. It was kind of a transition period.
It sounds like a great transition period.
I mean, like
if Dreams is just coming out and Staying Alive is about to come, like that's pretty something.
I mean, as an older, more mature adult, it's pretty good stuff. But when I was reading this book, like, like it was the worst thing. But something was stirring. The Doors were long gone by 1977. They had sort of set the stage for gloomy LA Gothic rock, which many people would poo-poo at. I'm not like big... I was once a big Doors fan. Now I'm not so much.
I never really got... I mean, I'm not a huge Doors fan.
Yeah.
I like many...
I like sliding doors. I like saloon. The band. That's the band. Go ahead.
I like the kind that like half opens and you can like sell stuff out of.
Horse doors?
Horse doors, of
Horse
course.
doors, yeah. Of course.
Horse doors, of course, of course door. But I never understood the I like enough of the Doors to like them.
Yeah.
Like I can't say I know their top tier.
Yeah.
I know a little bit of their second tier. I don't know their full catalog, but
I would say I know their full catalog because my older brother was really into the Doors, which was cool. And they have a lot of...
and you have to say that or else he'll give you a noogie.
Yeah, or else I'm in trouble. We have to acknowledge Jim Morrison is a big dork who'd wear no shirt, leather pants, and call himself a poet. Like, that's a big dork thing.
He's a dork, yeah. Well, that's what... They wanted to be called the Dorks.
They have a lot of good songs. It suffers from basic classic rockism where, like, the singing is 2 minutes and then everyone solos for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's got that going on.
It's drug music.
It's drug music.
Like the end is unlistenable.
Yeah.
Unless it's in a movie soundtrack.
Yeah, exactly. Unless Eek the Cat is parodying Apocalypse Now and you're like, is this the Doors on a kid's cartoon?
Yeah, unless I'm watching people actively getting PTSD,
right.
I'm not listening to the end.
They have their good songs, but yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Break on through, Greg.
But anyways, the Doors are not a great band, but they set the stage for the way the Velvet Underground in New York who is a great band, set the stage for like the punk thing of like, we're going to talk about really weird stuff.
Is the Velvet Underground a great band?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
I'm talking about musically.
Oh, musically, I think they're absolutely a great band. Do I get every single song? No. Do I like every single song? No.
Who's eating the banana?
Yeah, I can go on forever about the Velvet Underground. I think they're fantastic.
Look, this isn't yet a music podcast. It's well on its way, but it's not there yet. Right. Two guys that don't even know that much about music.
I like to think we know enough to carry a conversation, except for unless we're taking a jazz midterm and you're yelling at me.
If it goes past the 80s and it's not talking about Smash Mouth and Mark McGrath, we're not going to know.
I know my share of Nirvana and it kind of dies there.
Much like Nirvana.
No.
Part of Nirvana.
Maybe the most essential part of Nirvana. But anyways, yeah, the Doors were like the sort of... They sort of set the stage. A lot of people don't like the Doors. That's fair.
Stage door. That's a different type of door.
That's very funny. But Iggy Pop himself said there was elements of Jim Morrison on the Doors that would be repurposed for punk. Iggy Pop went to a college show to see the Doors, and Jim Morrison was drunk and singing all the Doors songs in a girl voice. And all the macho frat guys were pissed and threatening to beat Morrison up. And Iggy saw this and thought, this will be my entire personality. It's what I'm witnessing right now.
What if his shirt was off and he was throwing up?
What if he was cutting himself with glass and screaming, and all the other band members hated him, which was kind of Jim Morrison?
What if this guy grew up to look like a withered cigarette? I could do that.
I could do that. I could do that. Some consider the Doors to be like a proto-punk thing. Mm-hmm. So that was our proto-punk, the way the Velvet Underground. So Ronnie on the Rock was playing newer underground music at the time. Glam fans took the aesthetic of glam and mixed it with hard rock and nihilistic lyrics. And in many large cities, this recipe would produce punk. Sex Pistols, The Clash, the Sex Pistols were T-Rex fans, Stooges were Bowie fans, and so on and so on. So I'm just trying to set the stage of like what was happening at the time.
Rodney Bingenheimer, who we once saw in a car.
You once saw in a car,
yeah. You were there too.
Was I?
Yeah, it was you, me, and Melissa. And Melissa said, "Is that Rodney Bingenheimer?" And you said, "Yeah, that's Rodney Bingenheimer." And I said, "Who's Rodney Bingenheimer?"
I kind of remember that. I remember being with my brother and his wife, but maybe you're my brother.
That's me.
Maybe she's my brother.
Wait a minute. I'm your brother. I'm your father.
My brother.
I'm your brother. Yeah, Melissa's your brother.
Melissa's my brother.
I'm your wife.
Yeah, I remember perfectly family dynamics. So the first considered LA punk band, even though there might not be punk, is the Runaways.
Okay, Joan Jett.
Yeah, Joan Jett.
My old bean, the alumni of my same high school, Joan Jett. Granada Hills High School.
That's right.
It's Joan Jett, John Elway, maybe Robert England, and me.
We're the Mount Rushmore of my high school.
And Robert England has the Freddy Krueger hands face on. John Elway's holding a football.
Yeah.
Joan Jett's holding a guitar.
Yeah.
Robert England has the claws, and I'm just, what do I have? I have
You have a receipt for food? You're speeding a receipt with a restaurant owner right now.
It's me calculating a tip.
I could just give him like 34 cents, right? Like I calculated it. So anyways, yeah, music scene at the time, punk is starting to just like spit out into the scene. And it is 1970.
They would spit a lot if I know something about these nasty boys.
So the Runaways were first, and then they were followed by the Weirdos, the Screamers, the Plugs, the Dills, and the Controllers. That's sort of many consider to be the first punk bands in LA, like true punk. No other
the punkiest names I've ever heard. Also,
kind of, yeah. Writing them down, I'm like, oh geez, I have to say this to Daniel.
He's gonna tighten his tie when he hears these.
But where were all these up and coming bands rehearsing, or where were they party and play, or where would they go and get completely trashed? So in June of 1977, which is like the year that punk happens, 1977, and disco and like hip hop is like first happening in.
I'm telling you, what a great year! And Star Wars happens. Which was the punk of movies.
Elvis dies that year too, so like passing the torch from like one gyrating person to like people who will full out bring a dong out in the show, and you're like, Jim, Come on, put it away.
I'm just glad Elvis could pass something in that year.
Brendan Mullen, 1977 June, finds a 10,000 square foot basement at 1655 North Cherokee Avenue. It's the basement of the Pussycat Theater, which is like a porno theater.
As seen in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Exactly. Right around the corner. It's like dead on, straight across the street. Cherokee is where Larry Edmonds' shop is, I'm pretty sure. And then Moose and Frank's is just right there. It's a stone's throw away.
Okay. A Rolling Stone's
throw away. That's where this basement was, on Cherokee Avenue.
What a weird thing of like the Squeakies or whatever are playing in the basement of this place. And then across the street is like Bob Hope having dinner with Cary Grant at the Moose and Frank's.
Larry Edmonds, Pauly Platt, and Bogdanovich are writing scripts for money while they're up and coming. And downstairs, the Dills. This space was underground, so whoever was playing in the many rooms down there could play really loud. And it was described as feeling like a labyrinth with winding hallways running from the central concert area to rehearsal rooms where stained carpet scraps were tacked up to the walls for acoustic insulation.
I thought it was like Hall of Fame of like, this is where...
Yeah, this is a pee stain from this is a Cherie Curie's pee stain right here.
This is X's blood.
So Mullen got a month's free rent in exchange for clearing out 15 years of debris from the last occupant, which was the Don Martin School of Radio and Broadcasting, which operated in the 40s. According to Mullen, the building itself was historic, the Hollywood Center building that had gone up in 1923 thanks to Cecil B. DeMille, who had 5-story headquarters built right on Hollywood Boulevard, and that complex was his, and it gets cut up and distributed and then sold and blah blah blah.
A beautiful tale of Los Angeles history being passed down, not unlike that old building on Hollywood now becoming the Taco Bell Cantina.
Exactly.
A rich history.
A rich history we have. And any day now, this underground punk club's gonna be a Subway. Emphasis on sub, and this one's still gonna have a bunch of Jared posters on it.
It's an edgy Subway.
It's underground.
Jared.
What, the cops are going to come down here? For Mullen, the space would cost $850 a month, which was very reasonable for 1977 Hollywood Boulevard. Mullen would put an ad space out in the recycler, advertising music rooms to rehearse in for $2 an hour. With the basement of the place cleared out, it was ready for bands to start, quote unquote, rehearsing. Someone came into his life at just the right point, who was a man named Al Hansen, and a conceptual artist who had both worked with Yoko Ono and John Cage, and John Cage knew Brendan, which may be how the two of them met, Al Hansen. He had a pretty prolific life in the arts before moving to LA in the mid-70s with his daughter. His daughter was BB Hansen. BB was like just the right age to kind of start hanging out with these like young punk people. And BB was one of a dozen like Warhol proteges. You'd seen photos with like Edie Sedgwick. Like she was clearly like art cool scenester.
Nico.
Kind of like a Nico, yeah.
Bring it back to the Velvet Underground.
Yeah.
The Banana People.
The Banana People. No, the Banana Band. With a banana album.
Banana Boat, right?
They're the Bananas in Pajamas. BB was a performance artist and music and scenester. She'd hang around the Masque when it was a rehearsal space to watch bands practice and kind of hang out. And sometimes she'd bring her 8-year-old son with her, Beck Hansen, who we know as Beck.
Wait a minute. Beck.
Like the performer.
Like I'm
artist.
A loser baby?
Yeah.
Beck? Weird. So Beck is a Nepo baby?
I mean, like, he's more famous than his mother and grandfather.
Doesn't matter if you're born into Nepo. You're once a Nepo baby, always a Nepo baby.
She wasn't like in a punk band and it's like, I'm going to teach my son everything I know. She was just kind of like hanging around, and then her son saw stuff. It's like, this is great.
Musical Wes Anderson Beck?
Musical Wes Anderson. Yeah. So Beck would hang around the Masque as a kid and be like, what is
Beck
all
is
of
from
this?
LA?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
Isn't it nice to know?
Nice to know. Another, he could be the triple bill with David Lee Roth, Richie Valens, and Beck.
We offer all kinds of
a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Snoop Dogg's up there.
Yes.
While Al Hansen and Brendan were looking at this new rehearsing space, members of the band The Controllers came by looking for a rehearsal space to rent where they could play really loud, and this was just the place because it's underground. Nobody upstairs can hear us play. This would be a perfect space for them, and with that, two things happened. The Controllers became the first band in the Masque, and Al Hansen would meet them and end up being their manager. Jezza Gideon, also known as Jezza X, who's a well-known producer in the punk world, traded free room, meaning the floor of a recording studio, for running sound for the new space. Following The Controllers were the Berlin Brats, Backstage Pass, and the Motels. And then the parties started soon after this, and they would run all night. Like the parties there were like 24/7. And Exene from X says, like, we never knew when a show was starting or a band was playing or a party was happening or a party would turn into a rehearsal, would turn into a show. Like it was just like one big cloud of hanging out. So hanging out one day with the Controllers and the Skulls and Al Hansen, Brendan and the boys were kicking around names for the space, and they had a long list. The Pit and the Pendulum, the Toilet, Winkers Disco, the Hellhole, Slamorama, the Puke Bowl. All bad names. All stupid, bad punk names.
Fits for punk.
All bad, dumb 70s punk names. Also on the list was The Masque, Masque. And that name is also horrible. And the Mask was such a bad name that Al Hansen kept pointing out how bad it was. This is a direct quote from Brendan Mullen. Since I have a major contrarian reaction to authority, any authority, like some psychological allergy to do with my father, Al saying this was like waving a red flag. The more he bad rapped the name, the more contrarian I'd react. I said the dictionary definition of mask was a form of cheap, amateur, histrionic, medieval entertainment. Finally, Al stormed out in disgust, saying, "Where's the punk meaning in that name?" And so Mask it was. Literally because an older man in his early 50s seemed to be telling me what to do, and as fate would have it, I never saw Al the Jewish art leprechaun again.
Oh, what?
And I read that, I'm like, oh boy.
And as he signed off every statement he gave, Heil Hitler. There's nothing more punk than the French language, is there, Greg?
There really isn't. Like, the French really get it.
I mean, they're so punk, they chop the heads off of everybody in their government.
I was telling somebody at work this, but I remember being in high school history, and we're learning about the French Revolution, which I was very interested in because there's just like, another heads. And I remember asking, like, how does it fall apart? Like, or does it work or does it not work? Like, what happens? And I think that Miss McGee said, you can't just chop off everyone's head. And that always makes me laugh.
Can't you, Miss McGee?
And they certainly tried.
Chopped off Miss McGee's head.
Get in the guillotine.
Miss
She's putting down, Miss McGuillotine. She's putting down the French Revolution. We got to cut her head off.
You know what the punishment for that is.
So the Mask quickly established itself as a 24-hour punk party place. Practices, like I said, morphed into shows with people already hanging out there, coming into the audience. It was at the time no cover open door BYO parties until the Weirdos asked. Weirdos are a pretty good band. They asked, like, why do we have to play for free? And then Brendan was like, I don't know.
I don't mean to be too not punk about this, but do we have like a health plan? Or?
My teeth hurt. Can we like do something about that? Meaning the first official hired band paid gig was probably the Weirdos being like, we need money. Weirdos, known for a popular song, We Got the Neutron Bomb, but check out Hey Big Oil, The Hideout, and they cover, Link Wray's Fatback, all great songs. So cover charge for the band for most shows ended up being $250, which is why would you make it $250? Like, do you love Counting Chain? Do you like have an abundance of quarters?
It's like the El Monte thing of $350 for the bigger name shows. Like, why
do you want to put quarters in this mess?
And look, this comes back to me calculating tipping. Just round things up.
Yeah, round things up.
Bake it all into the price. Make it a round number. Don't make me deal with
how very European
decimal
of
points.
You.
Well, I spent a long time in France,
the most punk country.
Of countries. I'm a little bit punk. I believe in not having to calculate tips and also decapitating anyone who asks for
anyone who questions me. She hates quarters. Cut her head off. Unless like $250, it's easier. I have a $5 bill. You and and it just adds people to the.
But then that's not very punk to assume you're going to have a date.
That's true.
I mean, punk people are notoriously undateable.
Yeah. Undateable people who sneak into the bathroom to shows. But then it dawned on me as I was reading it, like, I'm pretty sure no one paid to get in. I'm pretty sure like $250. Oh yeah, let me go grab that. They just went through the sewers and found a different way in. Paul Collins of the great power pop band The Nerves, who I think had already broken up by this time, or I think they broke up at the Mask. He ended up running the door. And from there, the underground rehearsal space started becoming the scene. It went from 50 people consistently to about 70 to 100. As John Doe of X says, by the end of 1977, when the Whiskey A Go-Go had 10 people at their club, the Mask would have 200 people. To compensate, the Whiskey would start booking bands from the Mask to attempt to get that crowd to go to the Whiskey, and the punk scene in LA grows from there. Like suddenly the bands are playing 2 places, and then suddenly they're playing 3 places.
They got poached.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But the Mask was special because as opposed to the Whiskey, which was an official venue, the Mask was a party pad that just happened to have bands playing at it. 9 or 10 bands would be booked and shows would go all night, which is crazy.
This is similar to the place I'm going to be talking about, but a different genre of music.
Sure,
it was too good to contain.
Sure, yeah. It starts bleeding out everywhere.
And then you have to put that strip of carpet up on the wall. Much like Iggy Pop, it was bleeding out everywhere.
It was kind of bleeding everywhere. And somehow he's got more power now. The walls were covered in graffiti, and that happened like really...
By the way, if anybody's a Cenobite, it's Iggy Pop.
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. 100% living Cenobite. So the walls of the Mask were really quickly covered in graffiti of either bad names or corny punk phrases. But there was also graffiti that read, "The Mask welcomes nobody. Your mother is calling you wimp. Go home. Hippies go home. Hippies suck." All fun stuff. All great.
This is everything all the caricatures I have in my head of punk is this.
Unfortunately, all true. People were drinking and getting high or having sex in the corners of the bathroom. It was underground. So for the most part...
This is all checking out in my head.
So for the most part, the cops had for a while had no idea this was going on.
They can't find it.
They can't.
It's underground.
I can hear it, but I don't know where it's coming from. The cops had no idea there was even a human right they weren't being able to violate. The mask happened quite early in the history of LA punk, so the crowd of teenagers that were showing up would go off and form their own bands and become close friends because of this subterranean scene. Members of X, the Go-Go's, the Germs, the Bags, the Cramps are all mingling together and meeting for the first time at the Mask.
Yeah, that's another. Who is it? Belinda
Carlisle, yeah.
She can also be playing with David Lee Roth, Richie Valens, Beck, and Belinda Carlisle.
And Belinda Carlisle is the...
Joan Jett, too. She can be there.
She could be there.
Yeah, John Elway can toss a football around. Robert Englund can come and show off his claws.
Yeah.
And I'll go up on stage and calculate a tip.
I'm counting numbers from on stage. When punk bands came from out of town, the Mask was the spot that they had to hit. 3 of the 4 Sex Pistols visited the girls at the Mask, whatever that means, while Johnny Rotten hung around the height with his mother. And the book makes fun of him so hard. Like, he wouldn't come out. He's hanging out with his mom.
In a world where punk reigns supreme, hanging out with your mom is the most punk thing you
kind of the most punk thing you could do, yeah. And as we mentioned in our magazine episode, Claude Bessie of Slash Magazine was one of the guys hanging around the Mask and ready to document this truly special thing happening in the punk youth of LA. Scenesters would meet at the Mask, party together, become chummy, and then it would all find a place together. And then that would be an additional punk party pad. Like, this is where Brendan Mullen says somewhere, like, we didn't create punk, or this wasn't the first place punk happened, but like, this is where all the characters would meet each other, basically, in the early years. The most famous of the Mask shows happened on Labor Day weekend in 1977 when the newly formed Germs, Darby Crash, Lorna Doom, who's White Girl, the X's song White Girl, Pat Smear, later of Nirvana and Foo Fighters, and Cliffhanger, what is the drummer's name, later be replaced by Don Bowles, who would... Did I tell you that we knew the drummer from the Germs?
Yeah, I think you've mentioned that.
Okay, that we rented that space on like Slauson and Soto when we were interning for the record company, and upstairs was Don Bowles, and it was, oh crap, that's Don Bowles from the Germs. And it became, oh crap, it's Don Bowles from the Germs. We got to get out of here because he'll talk to us forever. We got to go. We got to hide behind the bushes.
He won't stop talking about the Stinky Pete's.
I also like to mention very briefly that Belinda Carlisle of the Go-Go's drummed for the Germs for like 3 nights. The Germs didn't play especially well, but like the Ramones, they were the right kind of chaotic and charming. And because of the show, they had a show, like a punk show at the Orpheum, and they kind of debuted there. They had created a lot of buzz around themselves, and that allowed them to pack the Mask with a crowd, like a legitimate like crowd of people that like to see them.
Would you describe the Ramones as charming?
Absolutely. The Germs are cool, but I'm like kind of a fan, because Darby dies really young. They don't have like the versatility. Like if you think of X or the Minutemen, we're like, oh, they have like a big sound. Like they're very different. Or X becomes the Knitters, and like they can do anything. The Germs are kind of like, well, they're bad. Their bad songs are pretty good sometimes, but they're like not a good band. I remember buying a tape. There was a great record store on Melrose called Tang Records, and you had to go down a long dark hallway to get to it. It was like behind all the storefronts. It's a great like little record store that's gone now. But I bought a Germs tape, like Germs Live, and I was like, oh man, I can't wait to watch it. And they're one of the worst bands I've ever seen perform live.
I can't wait to work under this guy.
Yeah. The Germs, one of the bigger LA punk bands, have a cult-like fan base, small but devoted, and Darby Crash is an interesting character in LA history, not just music history, both music and social, and we'll talk about him in a punk episode, but if he could have lived longer, he might have been L. Ron Hubbard. There's something called a Germs burn, which is just a cigarette burn, but their logo...
I've heard of that.
Yeah, the big logo is a big blue circle, and fans would
burn themselves
and be like, I'm a Germs fan. You're like, okay. All right. It should also be said, around this time, 1977 in LA, 2 maniacs, Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bono, known as the Hillside Stranglers, abducted, tortured, and murdered a Mask regular.
Oh, God.
Evelyn Jane King. The last time she was seen by some people was at a Halloween party at the Mask. She was picked up by the Hillside Stranglers at a bus stop outside of the Scientology Celebrity Center in Franklin. And as was their MO, they were pretending to be cops and picked her up and killed her.
Do you think that they were punk fans?
No, I think that they only had one interest. I don't think that they cared about music very much, other than just playing it loud so you wouldn't hear people scream from their mechanic shop. While investigating, 2 LAPD homicide detectives went undercover as art dealers and followed Billy Bones of the band The Skulls back to the Mask under the guise of wanting to invest in a punk band. And Brendan Mullen sniffed these 2 cops out real quick and pulled them aside and just frankly said, like, if a single person from the Mask knew anything, one tiny shard that could help them, they'd be calling the cops in a hot second, which is a correct reaction to have during the serial killers, like a reign of terror, to be like, okay, cops are okay, right now. Like, these are homicide detectives, and one of ours got killed.
I'm looking to buy a punk band.
Yeah. One punk band, please. Brendan didn't know every single person that came into the mask. What if the killer was among them? There's no way to tell. So Brendan went on to hire a 350-pound, 6-foot-tall security guard named Tiny Rosen to keep an eye on the mask.
Oh, okay. I think that's just a common.
Oh, okay.
I've got another bodyguard coming with that. I thought,
really?
imagine if it was the same guy, but it's not.
I feel like many large people are called Tiny as a cute thing.
That doesn't make sense. But Greg, they're big. This is a little too punk for me.
Opposites. I don't understand this at all. The murder of Jane King had really rattled Brendan, and even though she was picked up somewhere else, he had a sense of guilt, and that fear when death gets close to you kind of touched him. He partied less and began taking more responsibility for his space. Brendan would have Tiny walk girls to their cars, which is great. Tiny was great at communicating with the cops, and he became a celebrity at the mask, which is really weird, and I like that. But you'd think a bunch of like anti-authoritarian punks would resist, but they actually embraced the security guard, like, please keep us safe. There's somebody who is killing women. Please keep our women safe.
We're all talk.
Yeah, we're all talk. Please protect us. In 1978, the mask was temporarily closed down by the cops for a failure to secure an entertainment cabaret license, and he was already getting into it with the landlord and city hall, and he was consciously avoiding using the term club because he did not have a club like an entertainment license.
It's a rehearsal space.
It's a rehearsal space, exactly. It's a cabaret show, and they were ready to shut him down because he was converted one space's uses to be something else, and they already didn't like the scene that was happening, so they were just trying to find any way to shut him down. He started looking for another place to potentially operate should the city or the cops shut the mask down. In the meantime, a fundraising show was planned to put money together for Brendan's troubles. It was said to reopen the mask, it would cost Brendan $10,000. So all these teenagers who hate money,
they're going to have to bump it up to $275 a show.
So in February 1978, at the Elks Lodge in 99, or some call it the MacArthur, which is the beautiful Art Deco building right next to MacArthur Park.
The one that used to be like Harrison Gray Otis's house?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It's on the same side as the statue.
Okay.
It's on that small side street right there.
Right.
That place. I don't know how they pulled that off, but they were able to have two.
Well, Harrison Gray Otis loved punk.
He
hated unions, but he loved punk.
He loved Hard, Fast, and Loud. He was a big fan of that genre of music.
He loved listening to the Rotten Banana Peels. He loved them.
So they had 2 nights of punk shows for a fundraiser. 8 bands were on that bill, including the Screamers, which are a great band, the Bags, great band, the Deadbeats, I don't know them. The Zeros have one great song. The Germs, the Weirdos, F-Word, and the Skulls. Tickets were $5. They had another benefit at Lazzaro's Ballroom on Vermont in April featuring the Dills, ooh, the Bags, ooh, X, ooh la la, and Low Life. I don't know them.
Yeah, well, I've seen X live. Yeah.
I won $2 at that show. Not a big deal.
I bet on who would win in a race between a horse and X, and I won $3.
I won $3. I'm not going to say who won, but the horse is pretty strong.
Not going to say who won, but they had to guillotine the horse.
None of these shows helped Mullen in the long run, and the original mask ran until 1978 when the fire marshal finally had the place closed down thanks to a landlord getting fed up and ending the lease, and the many violations the club cited were enough to finish it off.
I was going to ask, like, there's no way this place was up to code. Like, and this has happened where like a fire breaks out at a club this and everyone dies.
There's subterranean, there's one exit.
Yeah.
The fire marshal's very mad. So in January of 1979, the mask closed for good thanks to the fire marshal. Mullen had to find a new space for what he calls the other mask. And he also calls it the new mask. He also calls it the second mask.
The son of mask.
Yeah, son of mask. Yeah. Jamie Kennedy joke. The other mask opened at Santa Monica and Vine, not sure where. And although people showed up, the piss-stained carpets just weren't the same.
Did someone shampoo these?
I joke, but this place was much nicer and offered more to musicians as far as sound and space. But by 1979, the second wave of punk creeped in, which was much harder, faster, and louder than the last. And the opening night of the other mask didn't seem to have any of those old bands that you'd find at the mask. In March of 1979, just to show you what was happening at the time, there was almost like a rockabilly old rock revival, and Brendan was sort of into that. So the opening night of the new mask had a lot of those bands. Where were the other bands? Well, in March of 1979, also at the Elks Lodge 99, the lineup was the Go-Go's, cute, the Plugs, pretty cool, the Alley Cats, I like them, the Zeros, and X. X never got to go on. There was said to be a riot, but as Jane Whelan of the Go-Go's puts it, cops came in and just started attacking everybody, including members of Black Flag, X, and the Go-Go's. This was known as the St. Patrick's Day Massacre. Basically, cops just stormed the place and started beating everybody up, which I believe it. Hardcore punk from the OC like Black Flag played, incredibly fast, incredibly hard than anybody in first alley punk. And alley punks did not really care for it. So the scene started at this point dividing in a lot of different ways. Also, heroin entered the scene. So like the cute little scene that was happening underground started to splinter off in so many other different directions. The Black Black Flag had their own space known as the Church, which was actually an abandoned church in Hermosa Beach, where like all those hardcore OC bands would start playing. That place got popular just as the other Masque closed down in like 1979. Brendan Mullen kept the spirit of the Masque going through concerts titled Masque Presents, and that kept things going for a while. After the other Masque closed down, he failed to get the original Masque open. Mullen worked for Club Lingerie, where he booked bands of a lot of different genres like pop, punk, jazz, and blues. Brendan Mullen continued working in all music for the rest of his life. He helped assemble the fantastic oral history of LA Punk, which called We Got the Neutron Bomb, The Untold Story of LA Punk, which is what I read when I was a teenager, and I thought this is the coolest thing, and it'll never happen again. And then I found The Smell, and I never went again. He died in 2009, but left a strong legacy on LA music history. As he said, he didn't invent LA Punk. The Masque and Mullen are only a small piece of the puzzle, but without it, the music scene in LA looks wildly different without the Masque.
Well, I mean, who doesn't without the Masque?
Without the Masque, yeah. Jim Carrey. I get movie references. The Masque was where all the...
Suddenly, they could all sing Cuban Pete.
And this is one Pachuco that the cops aren't going to try to beat up?
Well, he's green.
He's green. I'm scared of him. Exene Cervenka of X said, when X played at the Masque, I loved the blur between the band and the crowd, taking my turn jumping around in the mix of friends and weirdos and then back into the band. We were a vortex, a vacuum, an underground scene so secret and beautiful, it was hard to believe it was really happening.